Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, Joe and I break down the state of the Mets playing like a 500 baseball team, the ups and downs as the rotation turns, the highs of Quintana and Severino, the lows of the back end of the rotation, and some surprising bullpen struggles as well. A lineup that's either really hot or really cold. As always, we go down on the farm and look at Jonah Tong's hot start to the season in the minors. We review and have our new scoreboard predictions and close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This spring, inspire boldness in bloom at the Cadillac Move Up Sales Event. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode, of course, on SNY's YouTube channel, where you can leave a mailbag question in the comments and we'll get to it on the following show. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMeo. And Joe, the season continues to be a roller coaster for our Mets as they've gone from winning series to salvaging series, picking up the last game against the Giants and the Cardinals, while in really depressing fashion, dropping the first game against the Cubs in a series of 4. This is a 500 baseball team, Joe. This is what it's like. You have the high moments of taking 2 out of 3 from really good teams, whether it's the Dodgers, they win the series against Atlanta. And then when the schedule finally starts to go downhill a little bit, the Mets not only play down to their opponent, they play beneath them. And then you look at the starts they've gotten from Quintana going 8, Severino having 7 hitless innings and finding a way to lose that game. This is it right now, Joe. This is the state of a 500 baseball team. Now, the glass half full is there's a big reinforcement on the way in Kodai Senga, who has started to really throw at Citi Field. And then the glass half empty is some guys just simply need to step up right now, Joe, and we don't know if they will.
The thing about a 500 baseball team is it's just when one side is working, the other's not. When they're pitching, they're not hitting. When they're hitting, they're not pitching. And that's a lot of what the Mets have done so far this year. And, you know, I do want to go back to a lot of preseason expectations where there was some people obviously on the extremes. We don't deal with the extremes so much here where people are like, they're a 70-win team or they're a 95-win team. I think we reasonably said they're around a 500 team. I think I did 86 after they signed JD Martinez, which, to be honest, 4 games over 500 over a 6-month span is like a game a month almost, or just about a game extra a month. So it's not that drastic of a difference. I tend to, on average, look at the glass half full approach of Kodai Senga's coming back. David Peterson had his first rehab start, so he's working his way back. Tyler McGill's working his way back. So there are reinforcements on the way, as well as young pitchers like Christian Scott, who could potentially emerge. But they need to find a way to establish some consistency where the offense and the pitching are kind of working in unison for a stretch of games, which they did when they won, 12 of 15 or 11 of 14, whatever it was. And they just need to find their way back to that, because right now it's obviously just using Monday's game as an example. Luis Severino taking a no-hitter into the 8th inning. You should not be losing that baseball game, and the Mets did.
Right, and let's be real, Joe. It's an outlier when you get a hitless performance from Severino for that long, and Edwin Diaz is the reason. Well, let me backtrack that. I mean, a big reason the Mets lost that game is because Joey Wendle didn't throw home. That was the start of it. And then Edwin Diaz, who is, usually untouchable, Morel tattooed one. Like what are you going to do? These things happen. That's an outlier. That is not a pattern with the Mets. That's okay, this isn't going to consistently happen, but it is as demoralizing as a loss as we've seen this season because it's what you dream of. Nimmo starting the game off, getting you on the board, Severino being truly unhittable for so long, and then your bridge to Diaz was Severino to Diaz. Like, that's all you could ask for. But at the end of the day, it's not one of those times where you go, oh, like, this is all on Edwin Diaz. The Mets need to hit right now. And if the Mets don't hit, It doesn't matter what Luis Severino and Jose Quintana do this year. It doesn't matter what Kodai Senga does when he's back. And then you kind of have in the middle right now, Sean Manaea and Jose Buto, which, to be honest with you, if they are in the middle all year, that's probably a win, Joe, because what needs to happen for the Mets to sneak into a wild card spot? Well, Senga has to come back and kind of be closer to himself. Quintana has to be the guy he's been for most of his career. Severino, you want to see a bounce back season, and they've gotten even more than that right now. Where Manaea and Buto, you can be back end starters, which when you look at, kind of how they've been up and down this year, that's exactly how they've been. Now, here's the problem right now, Joe. Adrian Houser is basically at the point where his starts are non-competitive. When Adrian Houser starts a game, the Mets do not stand a chance to win that game. Not if they score 5 runs, not if they score 6, not if they score 7. I mean, that's just where they're at right now. And Hauser's been honest about that. It's not to beat up on the guy. He's the first one to say, listen, I'm not giving my teammates a chance. David Stearns did say on Monday they don't plan it moving off of Houser right now. Keep in mind, this is Stearns' acquisition. This is a guy that Stearns knows really well. Stearns has the full sample size, not the sample size we've seen so far this year. But the reality is, Joe, guys are knocking on the door. I mean, you open this saying David Peterson's coming back. Tylor McGill is getting healthy. Kodai Senga will be back before the break. It feels like to even have a remote chance of hanging around in this rotation, Houser really needs to start piecing together. I'm not saying lights out starts, but competitive starts.
He needs to get going right now because not even just the veterans, you have Christian Scott nipping at his heels as well.
Great
who,
ball.
When you think about him, he's a guy that it's very funny to follow his starts the way I do. The first inning, he just gives up a home run. That's just what he's done. Basically every start, first inning, a home run. And then from there, it's just like, okay, got it. And doesn't allow another hit. He's had more than one start of that nature this year. So between the returning of Senga and obviously Peterson and McGill, and even Max Kranick is back in AAA as options, you look at when Senga returns, do you want to go to a 6-man rotation where it's almost a full-time 6-man rotation because Senga now missed all this time and he's obviously used to closer to the 6-man type of rotation? And that could be an opportunity if you call up Christian Scott and activate Senga. You can kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone here where you can keep Senga comfortable on a schedule he's used to. And you could also monitor Christian Scott's innings this year. Because as we've talked about on the show, coming off of 87 innings last year, you're probably looking at 125 this year. But ultimately back to Adrian Houser, which was really the premise of the question. Nothing has been good for Adrian Houser this year. When you go and I know Baseball Savant isn't everything, but you look up and down, there's not even anything that was expected to be better. It is blue up and down except extension. So he gets good stride to the plate. That's all that Adrian Houser has going for him right now. And I know David Stearns had him previously and he really knows the player. So you want to lean to what Stearns is thinking. But if Houser doesn't pick it up this coming start, the next 2 starts, if it's 2 more non-competitive outings, the Mets have to seriously consider taking Adrian Houser out of the rotation and moving him into the bullpen. And doesn't mean he won't make any more starts, but it creates an opportunity for someone else that can, it'd be hard to give less than what Adrian Houser has so far.
Let's get into the lineup, Joe, and I want to sneak in a mailbag question that was in a 5-star review. Thanks to Tom from New Jersey. Right before JD Martinez made his debut, Tom asked, hey guys, with Martinez nearing his debut, what do you see the Mets doing with DJ Stewart? Stewart has played well enough to remain with the big club, but do you really carry 2 DHs? And if so, who's the odd man out on this roster? So as it stands right now, Joe, and a lot of this has to do with Starling Marte obviously taking leave, and we're recording this right before Marte is expected to be back, so you'll have your answer to this question, but I think it's a good topic for us to discuss scenarios. Mark Vientos comes up and plays hero, and you have to wonder if this can get some confidence for Mark Vientos, a guy that really is in no man's land right now. He's completely outproduced at the Syracuse level for 2 years. He has flashed with the Mets already this year, and I think he wasn't consistent enough last year, but you still want to see the opportunity this year where one really doesn't exist unless he could truly play third base. There's all chain link effects here, Joe. The way for Vientos to play more is if Brett Beatty loses time at third base or JD Martinez gets hurt. JD Martinez is here to hit. nearly every day. DJ Stewart is a whole nother wrinkle in this because he bats from the other side of the plate compared to Martinez and Vientos. He hasn't hit consistently this year, but he's had really, really big hits for a team that needs power, especially why Francisco Alvarez is down for 6 to 8 weeks. So forget, Joe, the exact science of what they will do. I mean, what are the options they can do here, especially as the cries get a little louder, rightfully and justifiably from the fan base, that if Joey Wendle's on this roster to be a defensive replacement, and he's one of the worst defensive players on the team, why is Joey Wendle on this roster?
That's a great argument because it's actually very surprising to me. When they signed Joey Wendle, I was like, this is just Luis Guillorme in a different human form where he's not going to provide much offensively, which you can accept. I mean, the Mets won 101 games with Luis Guillorme being the primary backup infielder. So you can survive with a light hitting defensive backup infielder. But I have, at least off the top of my dome, 3 kind of boneheaded defensive plays that Joey Wendle has made. And the StatCast data on outs above average have him as a poor defensive player this year. So I know he has historically been a very good defender. And I think at this point, it's probably slightly early to pull the plug. But if Joey Wendle's not going to provide that glove that the Mets signed him for, he is not someone that needs to be on this team throughout, the next few months of the season. I think where you're going to realistically look for a move for today, Tuesday, for Starling Marte, it's going to be someone that they can option to the minor leagues. It's, my gut is Mark Vientos is going back down, and I feel bad for him. But if Mark Vientos is here, and let's just, for argument's sake, say they got rid of Joey Wendle, when is Mark Vientos playing? Like occasionally spelling Brett Beatty against
not a defensive replacement.
Left-hand pitching. Yeah, he's not a defensive replacement.
He's a pinch hitter in the DH era, right?
And right now you have a DH in JD Martinez, who, like you said, Connor's going to play nearly every day. DJ Stewart is like a good fit on the bench where it's, you need some lefty power, and sure, it comes with strikeouts and there's obviously flaws to his game, but for a bench power bat, I think DJ Stewart fits what this roster needs right now. So to me, I think it's unfortunate and an awesome moment for Mark Vientos on Sunday, walking it off for the Mets and having that emotional scream of just pure excitement. And unfortunately, I think that means a couple days later, he probably finds his way back into the Syracuse lineup. But I think Joey Wendle's seat is going to start getting hotter and hotter unless he starts to make some changes. And it's just making the smart defensive play. It's not being, a gold glover, but on a ball like that, you have to know that you can go home.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, baseball teams are constructed, especially by a guy like Stearns, very, very, in a very particular manner. And the Mets, who are not a great team in baseball, but not a poor team. Here's the difference, right? When you're a team like the Mets that are on the fringe of being a wild card team in their internal view, being great on the margins matters so much, closing out games where the back end of the roster guys, and I think they've done a really good job of this with the bullpen, right? Like, look at some of the guys that have been in the bullpen this year that have gotten them through wins and came up in big moments. While you can almost argue the lineup is a little bit of the opposite, Tyrone Taylor, awesome so far. That's kind of the standalone to me. But when Alvarez got hurt, I mean, the Mets are almost a dead duck behind the plate right now with Nido and Narvaez. And it is what it is. They're not built to withstand an Alvarez injury behind the plate. When you look at, the roster as a whole right now, they DFA'd Zach Short, who was a defensive first guy, where you look at it and go, was that the right move? Should you have kept Short and got rid of Wendle? The bottom line is their defensive replacements outside of Taylor are not getting the job done. So you're right, Joe. They're in a weird state where they got to find a way, because for the team like it might not matter to like the Braves and the Dodgers and even the Yankees, but for the Mets, when you're fighting for a wild card, and this is where the deadline can save you. We constantly on the show go back to Daniel Murphy's statement of the sprint to the deadline. You know what's available at the deadline? Like ace pitchers and sluggers do not come in volume at the deadline. You know what's available at the deadline? Defensive replacements, specialists, platoon hitters. things like that. So the Mets just need to kind of find a way to navigate these next couple months, truthfully play just a little bit above a 500 baseball team, and then maybe they can round out some of their shortcomings on the roster. All right, before we close out the kind of our state of the team that we always open with, Joe, I kind of want your thoughts on Carlos Mendoza. It feels like the fan approval right now after a tough first week is sky high for Mendoza. And quite frankly, Joe, I think he's earned it. He's a good balance of analytical decisions and just baseball gut feel.
I think Carlos Mendoza entirely gets what it takes to be a manager at the major league level. And, we've talked about him over the last couple of weeks, and it's all prefaced with results down the road will determine how good and whatever. But within confines of where we are sitting right now, his ability to know the numbers say you should take Jose Quintana out for Adam Ottavino, and you go and you talk to him, and Jose Quintana talks his way into staying in the game. It shows that he has that feel for the moment of a game, because there's objective and subjective, which is something that David Stern said. And objectively, that's what they should have taken Jose Quintana out. But sometimes you just have to. I hate to use the term gut feel, because that almost seems like you're making an uninformed decision. You're just like, I just like feel like I'll keep him in. Yeah, it's not exactly that. So there's some, making it an informed decision. But Mendoza definitely has the feel for a game, which I think in the modern day of manager, where so much is predicated on following the data points, it's good that you could see him actually stray from it slightly and know the right time to pull that trigger and when not to.
Right. And I think another really cool tie into it is, Andy Martino wrote an article of just how hands-off Stearns has been. And obviously Stearns is a guy that will lean on data. I think he'll also lean on the eye. But Mendoza, there's been a feel this year, even the times his decisions haven't worked out, there hasn't been this stepping in or stepping over from the front office of like, no, you need to do this. And I think trust is a massive, important point of a relationship. And Stearns went out and hired Mendoza. Like, that's his guy. These two need to form trust amongst each other. And I think that's exactly how you do it.
And generally, when you want to be following the data, like there's a reason it exists. Like, in general, that's where you want to go. But when you look at Stearns allowing Mendoza to make those decisions, and, in that article that Andy wrote talking about how if a decision doesn't work out, he's not going to walk into Stearns' office and get screamed at the next day because something didn't work out. And Stearns said it really well in his press conference as well to me. When it comes to some of these in-game tactical decisions, sometimes it's process over results. While obviously over the long span, you don't want to have a bunch of negative results in lieu of going for a better process. But if you look at the game from the perspective of this is the right decision to make, that's the most important thing. This is the right decision. You don't know how it's going to work, because at the end of the day, they're human beings. Like, go to Monday's game, for example. Putting Edwin Diaz in a tie game in the top of the ninth makes all the sense in the world when you're at home. He gave up a home run to Christopher Morel. It's not anything that Carlos Mendoza did wrong as a manager. It's just that be the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. So I like that it seems like in the early going, Stearns has truly given Mendoza the latitude to be a manager of the New York Mets instead of just being the guy that passes along the information from the front office.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, let's go down on the farm. A new face to Down on the Farm. This is my favorite version of this. I love talking about Cowboy Ohtani, Jett Williams, Alex Ramirez, the real stars of the minor leagues. But Jonah Tong, former 7th-round pick for the 2022 draft, he gets the call up to Single A Brooklyn in St. Lucie this year, Joe. 18 2/3 innings pitched, 7 hits, 1 run, 36 strikeouts. Wow, what a turnaround from last year. I mean, what's going on with him, Joe, from a stuff perspective that he just completely mowed down all the competition at low A and gets the quick call up to Brooklyn.
So that run is also an unearned run. So he
Right.
is leaving St. Lucie with a 0.00 ERA going into Brooklyn. Jonah Tong, when you go back to the 2022 draft, he was someone that really jumped up boards and on the radar by participating in the MLB Draft League, which was new at that time. And he kind of topped the charts as far as pitch metrics there. And he caught the eye of scouts, and obviously the Mets had looked at him prior, but this kind of pushed him up maybe a little bit on boards. He goes in the 7th round, and it's just raw stuff, over the top delivery. And when you go back to 2023, it was, he didn't really know where it was going. He was throwing pretty hard. He had good stuff, but at time and getting tons of swings and misses, but it was all over the place. This year, he's refined his mechanics. His fastball has ticked up a little bit. It's in one start there at St. Lucie, it touched 97, but he's more of a 93, 94, 95 kind of guy with a hammer curveball. And what's important is he's now locating this stuff where he's throwing better strikes. He is not walking nearly as many batters. And shout out to Sam Dykstra over at MLB Pipeline, who posted that Jonah Tong actually led all pitchers in the Florida State League in induced vertical break on his fastball for average. So he's averaging 20 and a half inches of induced vertical break on his fastball, which if you've listened to this show for a while, you know what it means. If you don't, easy thing is when you hear a fastball has life and it feels like it's almost rising, that's what induced vertical break is. And 20 and a half inches is like an elite number for the major leagues, just for transparency. And Jonah Tong's a guy that didn't make my top 30 list when I made it in spring training. I have a feeling if he continues on this trajectory he's going, by my mid-season update that I'll do for SNY, he's going to be way higher than the back end of the top 30.
And Joe, I think it's easier for people like me and just, even just not even fans of the prospect game or just fans of the team to buy in to arms in the Mets system right now, right? The Mets aren't in the type of system anymore where it's like if a guy didn't go in the first or second round, he's nothing in the system, because now they're starting to have a track record of getting guys to upper levels of the minors that were taken in these later rounds. And Tong, yes, we need to see him actually have success as a 20-year-old in Brooklyn, but this feels like maybe their next success story of a guy, 7th round pick, not the biggest guy in the world, but the stuff is on the right trajectory for his age to kind of fly through the system over the next 2 years.
And it's a credit to obviously the pitching prospects in the system, because they have to put in the work. But the player development staff, especially on the pitching side, has made such strides under Eric Jagers over the last couple of years, where you can distinctly say for a number of pitching prospects that their stuff got better after entering the Mets organization than where it was in high school or in college where they were previously. I mean, you just have to look at Christian Scott. You look at Dom Hamill. Brandon Sproat's stuff is even a little better since turning pro. Cowboy Ohtani and Jonah Tong. And we could go down the list. The pitching depth in the system, while maybe not being so much highlighted on the national level quite yet, I think it's ahead of where the hitting is depth-wise in the system right now. So that's just a credit to the pitchers that the Mets have acquired, as well as the player development staff putting the plan in place for them.
Yeah, it goes back to, a quote we were told from a player in the clubhouse that has already, made it to the major leagues. If you can't figure it out here as a pitcher, I don't know where you can with the resources and everything you have around you. So it's really exciting to watch. One note from down on the farm this week, show favorite Jett Williams. He's on the 7-day IL with right wrist soreness. Joe, that doesn't sound like it's going to be a lingering injury.
No, from what I hear, it's relatively minor, but he's just going to be out for a few days, and the expectation is he's not going to miss a lot of time. So, unfortunately, as we talk prospects, Nate Lavender is undergoing Tommy John surgery. So kind of our spring pet cat of relief. He's going under the knife, it sounds like, here soon. So the Mets will be out Nate Lavender this year, but Jett Williams sounds much more like a short-term injury.
This week, the Cyclones host the Aberdeen Ironbirds, affiliate of the Baltimore Orioles. We know the kind of talent that system has. Friday offers ticket and 2 drinks for $22. Drinks include beer, seltzers, soft drinks, or water. Every Saturday, join the Cyclones for baseball you can drink. I've been to baseball you can drink. It is one hell of a time, folks. Get a game ticket plus 2 hours of beer, wine, seltzer, soft drinks, and more. Sunday, first bobblehead giveaway of the season. The first 1,000 fans will receive a custom Brooklyn Hefe Sugar Skull bobblehead in celebration of Cinco de Mayo. For more details and tickets, visit brooklyncyclones.com. As we always do, Joe, time to review our scoreboard predictions from last week and make some new ones for next week. Thanks to everybody that's been following along. Boy, did I need a bad week for
look,
you,
I'm going
Joe.
with the Apple filters. I love it. If you're watching on YouTube, you just saw some rain on my head.
Yeah, and boy, you kind of deserved the rain. Not that I did much better. Over-under push was set at 2 for JD Martinez hits. Joe, we both pushed. He had 4. No points awarded to either of us. That's good news. JD Martinez looks just fine. Over-under push is set at 1 for Brett Beatty home runs. Joe, you pushed. I went under. The under hit. I get a point. Over-under push was set at 5 for Starling Marte hits. Okay, this is a little unfair. Joe, you pushed at 5. I went over 5. He had 1 because he hasn't been playing, okay? So this one, tough market for us. Over-under push set at 1 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings. Joe, you pushed. I pushed. They had 2. No points award at the buzzer. Quintana and Severino back-to-back. You can't make it up. Over-under push was set at 3 for Reed Garrett appearances. Joe, you pushed. I pushed. He had 2. No points awarded. Just a brutal week for the Mets pod. Over-under push was set at 3 for Mets wins. We both went over. They went under at 2. No points awarded. Joe, no points in the week. I get 1. The score is 11 for Joe on the year. I have 8. And we continue on. This week, 7 games. 3 against the Cubs, 3 against the Rays, 1 against the Cardinals. Joe, I win the week, so I'll start. My proud win by 1 point. Over-under push set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs. Joe, I'm going to go over. I think Pete really gets it going here. Power surge coming. I think Pete can go over the number of 2.
This is always the tough one for me because Pete Alonso obviously is one of the most prolific power hitters in the sport, but he goes through spurts where there's just like a period of time where he does nothing, and then there's a week where he'll hit like 5 or 6. I'll push and just say he's going to hit a couple, but it'll be different than you, so I'll go push.
Tomas Nido starts is set at 3, Joe. What do you like here?
I'll go over. I think we're seeing the Mets want to utilize Nido's defense to help the pitching staff, especially considering Omar Narvaez hasn't exactly been hitting the ball very well since Alvarez went down. So I'll go over and give it, 4 for Nido and 3 for Narvaez.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing. They've straight up said this is going to be a 50-50 split. But when you just look at what Nido brings right now, I'll take him getting 4 of the 7. In this one right now. So Brandon Nimmo walks. Over under push is set at 5 here, Joe. Nimmo on the year has had some power. He's still getting on base, 362 on base percentage. The average at 206, not like Nimmo at all. He's getting his walks here, but I'll go under here, Joe. I know under 5 walks in 7 games feels strange for Nimmo, but I think he's going to start putting the ball in play more as that average is really, really dipped far down.
I'll go under as well. I think, Nimmo always has that eye, and he could draw walks anytime, but I think it, just like you said, Connor, I think he's going to start working that batting average back up to norms, and sounds like this is a good week to do it.
Over-under push is at 2 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings, Joe. 7 games you got here, keep in mind. What do you like?
I'm still gonna push. I know we had a couple in a row here right at the buzzer to get us on last week's scoreboard, but I will go with 2.
I'm gonna push as well. I just think right now, let's call it what it is, right? Like the starters are not really pushing deep into games. Quintana and Severino did, and Severino is the ace of the staff right now. It's hard to see Quintana consistently being that guy, but if him and Severino are the guys to do it, that's still 2. I'm still going to go with the push. Somebody needs to step up in that role. Over-under push is set at 4 for Mets wins in 7 games. Wow, the Mets need to get it right here, Joe. I am going to push right here. I think they win 4 of 7 and remain the 500 baseball team that they are.
I think we're lining up a little more than we usually do here this week. I think this is going to be the tail of the Mets season in a lot of ways. It's going to be pretty good weeks, pretty bad weeks, and we're going to change the tone of this podcast every single week, which should just be really exciting for the people listening. But I will also push at 4.
All right, as always, let's close out the show with some mailbag questions. We haven't gotten to Twitter in a while, so let's jump into there. This one from Emily, who asked, when Alvarez returns, is there any way to keep Nido and DFA Narvaez? Neither is great offensively, but Nido's defense and his ability to call games is essential with this lineup.
I think that's very much in play, because when you talk about Alvarez's time to come back, it's going to be 2 months from the surgery at least. So you're going to have quite a sample size of what Nido and Narvaez look like. And when you get to kind of the midpoint of the season, almost at that point, if it's not working for Narvaez, you could just eat half a year's salary, designate him for assignment. Because I think if the Mets are going to be competitive throughout the second half, I think it's going to be important that their backup catcher is a plus on the defensive side.
Right. It's, at this point with Narvaez, you look at the money, it's the last year of his deal. If somebody really wanted him, Joe, maybe the Mets ship him out for free and pay down 80% of the contract, because that's still saving you 20% that you weren't going to save. I agree. It's hard to see him. You know what it's starting to remind me of, Joe? Do you remember the end of, was it Wilson? Yeah, Wilson Ramos, the end of his Mets tenure. Ramos just became unplayable at that point. Yeah. Like his first year, very quietly with the Mets in 2019, Ramos in 141 games, he had over 500 plate appearances. He hit 288 and he had a 768 OPS. He hit 14 home runs. Like, it was a fine season. And then in 2020, he didn't hit, and they could not have him behind the plate anymore. He was in a gigantic liability. It feels like with Narvaez right now, it's reaching the Ramos point of, you're not getting anything offensively. He's a complete liability behind the plate. The money just doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where you're headed. And certainly it being the last year of his contract makes it a lot easier, because you're not eating money into, next year's payroll. It's just, for the rest of this year, you gotta have the best players possible on the roster, especially when you're getting closer to that second half where it's, hopefully we're pushing here with the Mets for a playoff spot. And if that's the case, you can't let a couple $1 million of, sorry, Steve Cohen, I'm deciding what you do with your money, but you can't let a couple $1 million make the difference in having probably the better catching duo that you can have.
Right. And I guess this is kind of that time where it's frustrating that Parada's not on the trajectory we thought he'd be on, Joe. And we knew defensively with Parada it would take a while, but we always thought offensively he would kind of fly as a big-time college bat. 22-year-old in Binghamton not hitting the panic button, but Parada's not in play for this year at all. And these are the times where you wish he was, because the whole thought was at least you'd be getting offense from him. And, he's a guy that's just not, he just hasn't really figured it out in the minors yet, which kind of transitions to the next question, Joe, that is very directed at you from David. It's still early, but what are your thoughts on the Mets' young prospects' lack of production in the minors so far? Outside of Ramirez and Cowboy Otani, he said McLean, Cowboy Otani, it's been pretty weak so far.
So on the pitching side, I don't agree, but
David did clarify in a follow-up. He said, sorry, I wasn't clear. I meant the offensive production. He said the pitching's going well.
Yeah, the pitching's been fantastic. I think there's a couple factors here. So I think when you look at Luis Angel Acuna, he's starting to heat up a bit. And it doesn't get past me that, and this is not making an excuse for the player, but this is probably the coldest weather he's ever played baseball in his life. And starting at the AAA level in cold weather, I think Acuna's had a bit of an adjustment period. But over the last 7 to 10 days, you're starting to see better contact. You're starting to see him spray the balls into the gap, which is his game, and he hit a monster home run to dead center over the weekend. So I think he's trending in the right direction, but certainly if you just type in Luis Angel Acuna baseball reference, the numbers don't look great. So he was off to a slow start. I think he's picking it up. Jett Williams weirdly got off to a slow start, which is what he did last year in St. Lucie. He got off to a slow start, and they picked it up in a big way, and now he's injured. So that's a factor there. Ryan Clifford, the power hasn't really jumped out yet this year, which part of that is playing in Brooklyn, left-handed hitters. Like, I know it sounds like I'm making a whole bunch of excuses here, but there's no way around it. The offensive players have not performed like the pitching prospects have. But with that said, I think, between Acuna and Jett Williams and Clifford especially, I feel really good about their skill set and their talent, that I think as we progress over the 2024 season, you're going to get better results from them. And Alex Ramirez, who we pointed out, gosh, shout out, huge strides that he made. We talked about him on Down on the Farm last week or the week before. I mean, he's up to 11 stolen bases in 19 games. So his impact all over the field is finally getting felt. And, it's only April, so we have to see how he sustains this over the season. But from watching him play, it looks like the raw tool set that he has is finally coming together into an on-field product, which is very exciting.
Without a doubt. And a lot of the guys outside of, Jett and Acuna that we've talked about so much, like Colin Houck, Marco Vargas, they're so young that you're just trying to get them accustomed to hitting at all in the minors right now. You know what it is, Joe, this made me think of, though? With these guys off to a slow start, and it being unfair to expect contributions from them at the major league level anytime soon anyway, I think we reacted to it at the time, and everybody did, but maybe not even enough. The Ronny Mauricio injury looks huge for the Mets right now. It's pretty crazy when you think about it, because the reality is Jeff McNeil has not been good this year. There's just no way around it. He's fine at second base, but offensively, he's just not the player that we hope for. And there's plenty of time to turn it around, but I'm quite frankly kind of tired of saying that every week now for a year.
Yeah.
Mauricio, it just feels like I'm not expecting him to be an all-star, but with Mauricio, I don't know if you're looking at having the Joey Wendles of the world on this roster, and you're getting a little more thump out of an infielder, and you're getting a guy that can run. And honestly, put the ball in play last year when we thought he'd be a strikeout machine. So it just kind of goes to show you that it's weird to say things are wrong right now because a guy that would have really been a true rookie isn't here because his season's lost. But the Mauricio injury is pretty big for the Mets right now.
It is. Not even just McNeil. I mean, Brett Beatty got off to a really hot start. He's fallen back a little bit, and
it's not hitting any home runs.
Yeah, he's not hitting the ball in the air enough. But I think this is something where I think Beatty's going to have a lot of this year, up and down. And right now it's just a down. And when he's down, it's just pounding the ball into the ground. And we've talked about this for at least a couple of years regarding Beatty. Mauricio, on the other hand, obviously the Mets missing him. This is a guy that has no problem elevating the baseball. So obviously they miss Mauricio, whether that's for a super utility infielder or maybe taking at bats away from Brett Beatty or McNeil. But nonetheless, unfortunate, but Ronny Mauricio could have had a nice impact on 2024.
All right, our last question from today. This is from @top_S21. Why do they keep using Edwin in non-save situations? And then in parentheses, I'm not blaming him for the loss, though. What do you think of that strategy, Joe, that Diaz kind of always pitches when the game is tied? First of all, I'll be it's a hindsight thing, I think, right now. I'm the first one when the game's tied, get Diaz in and give yourself the best chance to find a way to win. But what do you think? Do you think there's times where you have good arms in the bullpen, even with Brooks Raley down right now? Is there times where you kind of should look at it the other way and see if you can kind of push until you have to press the Diaz button?
Well, part of this too is, are you home or away, right? When you're home, there is no save opportunity after the ninth inning if you're tied. Doesn't exist. You either
just pitch.
Win. Yeah. So I think when you're home, ninth inning tied game, in an ideal world, you just want to get to the ninth and have the game still be tied. and there is no pitcher that you're going to feel better about in this bullpen to get you there than Edwin Diaz. And of course, didn't work out on Monday night. It's going to happen. He's not perfect. He's going to give up home runs. He's going to give up things from time to time. It just so happens that's the most recent game, so it kind of, sticks in our brain. But I think largely when you're home, you want to throw your closer in a tied game in the ninth to give yourself the opportunity to walk it off in the ninth as a tie game. Obviously, if you are on the road, then it's a different conversation where there is that opportunity for the save where you might want to save Diaz because now he's worked back-to-back days, Sunday and Monday, probably not available here on Tuesday night, which means if the Mets are in a save situation, it's going to have to be someone else stepping up.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. There are those who wait for spring, and then there are Cadillac drivers who boldly inspire its arrival, matching spring's exuberance with stunning performance and radiant style. So this spring, inspire boldness and bloom at the Cadillac Move-Up Sales Event. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch every single episode on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. You will never miss a show. For Joe, I'm Connor. We'll catch you next week.